Hi, this is Anand Bhaskar from BKBB, an acronym for Bhaskar Ki Business Baatein. This is a channel which used to bring to you and continues to bring to you every week a policy analysis, a story, or a conversation. And 3 weeks ago, we decided to start this channel, which you're on now, which is on news. Well, let's call it news behind the news. And this is where we take a few headlines which we think of crucial importance to the audience and we try analyzing them. And of course, I'm joined by my co-anchors. There's Katya and there's Isha. And together we shall try to analyze some of the news developments for you. And yes, do remember that in your chat column, in your comments column, you can post your questions. We'll try to answer 2 or 3 questions at the end of the show. And finally, one small reminder, please subscribe to this channel. Tell your friends about this channel and ask them to subscribe too. And finally, do click the like button. We are enthused when we get more likes. And we are also aware that likes indicate to us what we should focus on more often in the future. We are talking about India at a time when the global markets are choppy. The talks in Saudi Arabia failed. Of course, everyone says we are still discussing, but no breakthrough is possible between USA and Russia on the issue of Ukraine. And the fundamental flaw which people forget is that a ceasefire is possible when there's someone to monitor the ceasefire. If Russia and the US are equals, who's going to monitor the ceasefire? A very interesting question, and that is one of the areas where there'll be a lot of heartburn. Anyway, let's go back to the news today. And the first news item, which are the 3 news items, which we'll read just now. They are there on the screen before you. The first of them is about the finance bill. Lots of amendments are passed. But the most talked about amendment is the one which scraps digital tax. The second story is about the huge boom in the Indian stock markets. And the third is about how small brands are proliferating. Each of these stories points to a segment of what's happening in India. Let's go to the first story. Could I ask Isha to help us with the first story?
Good morning. Thank you for tuning in today. Today, the story I'm bringing you is from Business Standard, and the headline is titled, Government Seeks to Drop 6% Equalization Levy on Online Ads. So, as you might know, the Finance Bill 2025 has come out, and with it has come 59 proposed amendments, some of which you can see on the right side of your screen. But of these amendments, one of the most popular changes proposed, according to me, is the proposal to scrap the 6% equalization levy imposed upon the advertisements provided by non-resident entities like Google, Meta, and X. So, for these tech giants who make a large chunk of their revenue through advertisements, this amendment would be highly beneficial, allowing them to maximize upon their profits without having to pay the equalization tax for India, which is a huge market for them. This move follows the government's decision to eliminate the 2% levy on online e-commerce transaction in August 2024, a levy that was initially imposed in 2020 was then revoked in 2024, and this move as well has been highly advantageous for these international e-commerce giants like Amazon. Furthermore, this drop of the equalization levy can be understood in the context of the upcoming trade talks on the bilateral trade agreement with Trump on the 2nd of April. So, expecting retaliation against the amendment seeking the removal of the corresponding tax exemption, which is the Section 1050, which brings advertising revenue by international parties under regular taxation. This policy is basically an equalizer of sorts. So, the government is accommodating by removing this equalization levy and compromising with the US. And I think this is representative of India's fear of a critical response from the US in the form of retaliatory tariffs. So we are playing very diplomatically. Very interesting story, lots to see in the space. But that's all from my side. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, sir.
Well, thanks, Isha, for a very important piece of information. It also points to two things. One, unlike the EU, unlike Germany, unlike Mexico, unlike Canada, India is willing to counter to America. Do remember that in India's already agreed to America's Starlink to come to India. Earlier, it had refused permission. Now it is removing taxes for digital companies, which are stationed overseas. More concessions will follow. It has kept quiet about the import tariffs Trump wants to impose on steel and automobiles and pharma. I do not know why India is so nervous about the US. When other countries stand up, why can't India? You talked about Atmanirbhar, you talked about Swabhiman. What happened? So there is a funny situation emerging. Plus, there's a second issue. When you remove the taxes from these companies, it will affect your financial collections, which means you'll make good for the shortage in tax collections by levying more taxes on domestic Indians. The domestic Indians are already hard pressed. The middle class has been squeezed in a way. It has not happened for almost about 3 decades. So, interesting times, worrying times. Let's see where it goes. And that brings me to the second story, where I talk about the big boom in the stock markets. And as Business Standard shows very clearly, the markets are booming. Foreign institutional investors are returning, though not in the same numbers as they were there before. And the question is, why? Because India's vulnerability is still very great. As Isha's story just about a minute ago told you, that India is willing to kowtow to the US. So is there a reason for the markets to boom? What about the Dow Jones? The Dow Jones in the US is slipping. If the Dow Jones is slipping, why are Indian markets booming? Unless the government is trying to make sure that the markets remain buoyant so it gets some more money. There's, of course, one silver lining. The US dollar is getting weaker, so the Indian rupee looks stronger. It's not that the rupee is stronger, it just looks stronger because the US dollar is getting weaker. So maybe that could be one reason why the markets are buoyant. But will they remain buoyant? Let's see. There are issues: corporate profitability, investments, new jobs, and the possible consequences of any concessions to the USA. Very, very difficult to predict, but the market buoyancy is being welcomed by everybody, and well, it's good news. Okay, that is my story. And now let me go to the third story, which is Katya's story.
Thank you, sir. It's actually a very interesting story. This story started during post-pandemic when commodity prices started going down. A lot of these smaller consumer companies have started growing and growing very, very aggressively. Since 2022, they've started hitting FMCG sales. So the large FMCG sales that as FMCG companies we talk about, they're not just facing a slowdown as such, a consumption slowdown. They are also facing aggressive competition from these smaller players who are coming and eating up a part of their sales. So the problem with it is these premium, a lot of these market, the consumer market is showing very interesting divergence. There are a set of consumers who are shifting away from the mass markets, which HUL and Marico kind of companies offer, up to premium. A premium, this kind of premium block is being supplied by D2C companies, and then there are international brands. So they are shifting to this market. And then the lower end of the market, which is actually the big volume market, is also shifting. It's shifting to smaller consumer local brands. So these are these local companies who distribute in a certain segment within a state. even within a district, I've been told. So this is the data that Kantar says. So as you can see in it, how big companies have been growing much more slowly, just 2 to 3% growth, and the smaller companies 12%, 10%, a little over 10%, close to 7% is the growth that they are exhibiting, which means being the basic company is not going to work out for a lot of large companies. I'd like to hear your thoughts, sir. Do you think these big FMCG companies, giant FMCG companies, have to reinvent themselves to capture, so they cannot be basic? So they can either cater to the local market or cater to the premium market. What are your thoughts?
Katya, a very good question and a very interesting item from you. Uh, you see, this is something that happens in all countries which are developing. The real talent lies at the bottom of the market. The bottom of the pyramid is the same. And when these small brands come up and do very well in small localized areas, it's a good sign. But FMCG companies are also aware that let them grow, let them build the market, let them build the brand. At the right time, we'll buy them out. This is what happened to MTR. This is what happened to the famous hammam soap of Tata, Tata soaps. It happens all the time, and small brands are picked up. What is interesting is to watch the small guys who have become very large, like the Haldirams.
Mm.
Will they sell out? I don't know. If the price is right and the
Wow.
family wants money, why
Mm.
not? And the best time
Sure.
to sell out is when there's a family dispute. When everyone wants some money, which in the
Okay.
Sipla is up for sale. So you have these very interesting stories about money being available to buy them out, so that FMCG companies become stronger. And of
Mm.
course, entrepreneurs who keep on growing all the time. But yes, great story. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of our three stories today. And we are just waiting for the questions to come. And yes, there is one. Are there any Indian beneficiaries from the digital tax amendment? Prima facie, it looks like these are amendments aimed at companies stationed overseas, registered overseas. The Meta, the Facebooks, the Twitter, X, sorry. All these players are big players overseas. India, unless let's say a Times Entertainment decides to have an international office and the Indian becomes a subsidiary, I do not know whether Indian companies will benefit. But the danger is that Indian companies may have to pay more tax to compensate for the loss of revenue from foreign companies. So you please America and you squeeze the Indian, uh, difficult times. There is another question: is a market surge sustainable? Yes, it is sustainable for some time because the government has asked all investment companies to support the market. And collectively, when they start supporting the market goes up. A lot will depend upon one, Dow Jones, where the international markets stumble. If international markets stumble, can India be insulated? The past has shown that India is no longer decoupled from international markets. The Dow is slipping. Global revenues are slipping. Most countries are growing less than they were last year, except China. And so you have a situation where the market could slip anytime, especially if the dollar becomes shaky, especially if the Dow Jones slips more, and especially, that's a big especially, if the global conditions lead to a big war, which given Trump and given the support he has given to genocide and ethnic cleansing is possible. So that is the third one. And oh yes, that's a very interesting question. Do more small brands indicate vibrant entrepreneurship? Yes, of course. In most countries world over, it's a small and medium enterprises that actually become the big contributors of wealth. The big companies remain beacons telling the small companies where to go, which way the market is headed. But the small companies pick up the niches that big companies have not catered to. And each one of them caters to a niche, either regional niche, a geographical niche, or a product niche. And they all go there and they start growing. This is where venture capital comes in. This is where private equity comes in, and this is where mergers and acquisitions come in. It's an interesting market. Entrepreneurship takes many forms, and this is one of the forms, and the government should encourage that and be gentle on taxation with such entrepreneurs. Anyway, that brings me to the end of today's session. Do remember to click the icon for subscribe, and do click the like button. And do remember, we are live every morning of a weekday at 8:15. Do tune in. It's wonderful to have you here today. Have a great day and see you tomorrow. I look forward to it.